They say trust is the foundation of marriage. What they don't tell you is what happens when that foundation is built on quicksand and lies. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been married to Sarah for 12 years. 12 years of her rolling over in bed, 12 years of not tonight, honey, and 12 years of believing I was the problem. Until I found the evidence that changed everything. It started on what should have been our anniversary weekend. Sarah claimed she needed a girls' trip to Cleveland with her sister Angela to reconnect and find herself. The same Angela who'd been whispering poison in Sarah's ear since day one of our marriage, telling her she deserved better than a small-town electrician who smelled like wire nuts and honest work. "You understand, don't you, Jake?" Sarah had said, not really asking. "I need space to figure out what I want." What she wanted, apparently, was Rick Donovan. Rick used to be my best friend. We'd grown up together in this Rust Belt town of Millfield, Ohio, where the biggest excitement was Friday night football and the annual corn festival. While I'd built Morrison Electric from nothing, working 18-hour days and bleeding for every contract, Rick had inherited his daddy's construction company and spent most of his time at the country club, talking about his golf handicap and his latest conquest. The night before Sarah's girls' trip, I was cleaning out her car to surprise her with a detail job. That's when I found the overnight bag she'd forgotten in the trunk. Inside were items that made my blood run cold: unopened boxes of condoms, personal lubricant, and lingerie I'd never seen before. The same woman who claimed she wasn't ready for intimacy with her own husband had packed like she was heading to a honeymoon suite. I sat in that driveway for an hour, holding the evidence of my wife's betrayal, feeling something dark and calculating settle in my chest. The old Jake would have confronted her, would have screamed and cried and begged for an explanation. But the old Jake was dead. In his place sat a man with nothing left to lose and a very specific plan forming in his mind. That night, I made a substitution. I replaced the lubricant with industrial-strength superglue, the kind I used for electrical fittings that needed to hold under extreme pressure. Then I waited. The call came at 2:47 a.m. "Jake!" Angela's voice was panicked, almost hysterical. "You need to get to Cleveland General Hospital right now. Sarah's had an accident." I drove to Cleveland in record time, practicing my concerned husband routine in the rearview mirror. When I arrived at the emergency room, the scene was everything I'd hoped for and more. Sarah was sedated, Rick was nowhere to be found, and Angela looked like she'd seen a ghost. "What happened?" I asked, playing the part perfectly. They... Angela couldn't meet my eyes. "There was an intimate situation that went wrong. Very wrong. The doctors had to separate things that had gotten stuck together." The beautiful part was that Sarah couldn't tell anyone the truth without admitting to the affair. She had to suffer in silence while the hospital staff whispered, and the story inevitably leaked back to Millfield. By the time we returned home, everyone knew that Sarah Morrison had been rushed to the emergency room during what the gossips delicately called a compromising situation with a mystery man who'd fled the scene. But that was just the opening move. "How could you do this to me?" Sarah hissed once we were alone in our bedroom, her face still flushed with humiliation and medication. "You knew, didn't you? You planned this." I looked at my wife of 12 years, this woman who'd shared my bed while dreaming of another man, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I don't know what you're talking about, honey," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm just glad you're okay. Though I have to ask, what exactly were you doing that required emergency medical intervention?" She couldn't answer. She couldn't even look at me. That's when I knew I had her exactly where I wanted her. The thing about small towns is that secrets spread faster than wildfire, and everyone loves a good scandal. Within a week of the Cleveland incident, as it came to be known, Sarah couldn't show her face at the grocery store without whispered conversations stopping mid-sentence. I played my role perfectly. The concerned husband, baffled by his wife's mysterious accident, supportive but clearly confused. When people asked what happened, I'd shake my head sadly and say, "The doctors aren't sure. Some kind of allergic reaction during her girls' trip." Thank God Angela was there to help. Angela, meanwhile, was doing damage control, spinning elaborate stories about food poisoning and panic attacks. But the hospital staff had talked, and in a town like Millfield, the truth has a way of surfacing. People knew Sarah Morrison had been caught in a compromising position with a man who wasn't her husband, and they were loving every minute of it. Sarah tried to maintain her dignity, holding her head high at the bank where she worked as a loan officer, but I could see the cracks forming. Her perfect facade was crumbling, and she was taking it out on me. "This is your fault," she'd spit during our increasingly frequent arguments. "You did something. I know you did." "Did what exactly?" I'd respond, my voice calm and reasonable. "Forced you to cheat on me? Made you pack condoms for a girls' trip? I may be just a simple electrician, Sarah, but I'm not a magician." The truth was, I was just getting started. My next move came during the annual Millfield Chamber of Commerce dinner, a stuffy affair where the town's business elite gathered to pat themselves on the back and make deals over rubber chicken. Sarah had been looking forward to it for months, seeing it as a chance to rehabilitate her image and remind everyone that she was still a respectable member of the community. I made sure Rick would be there. It wasn't hard. Rick's construction company was a chamber member, and despite his recent embarrassment, his daddy's money still talked in this town. I simply mentioned to a few key people that it would be a shame if Rick let one little misunderstanding keep him away from such an important community event. Sarah didn't know he'd be there until we walked into the Millfield Country Club ballroom, and she saw him across the room, looking uncomfortable in his rented tux. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. "We're leaving," she whispered, grabbing my arm. "Why?" I asked innocently. "We just got here. Besides, you've been looking forward to this for months. You said it was important for your career." Rick saw us and had the decency to look ashamed, but Angela was with him, playing the role of supportive friend, and she whispered something in his ear that made him straighten up and walk in our direction. "Jake," Rick said when he reached us, extending his hand like nothing had happened. "Good to see you, buddy." I looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Around us, conversations quieted as people sensed drama brewing. "Rick," I said finally, not taking his hand, "how's your health? I heard you had a scare recently. Something about a medical emergency?" His face went red. Sarah made a small sound like a wounded animal. Angela stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Jake, maybe we should..." "Should what, Angela?" I turned to my sister-in-law with a smile that was all teeth. "Should pretend that my wife didn't end up in a Cleveland emergency room during what was supposed to be a quiet girls' trip with you? Should I pretend that Rick here didn't mysteriously disappear from that same hospital, leaving my wife to explain her condition to the doctors alone?" The conversations around us had stopped completely now. The entire room was listening, and I had their full attention. "You want to know what really happened in Cleveland?" I continued, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. "My wife was caught in a compromising position with her lover, and when things went wrong, very wrong, he ran like the coward he is, leaving her to face the consequences alone." Sarah was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Rick looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Angela was frantically signaling to someone, probably hoping to create a distraction. But I wasn't done. "And the best part," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "she still can't figure out how I knew, how I planned it, how I made sure that her betrayal would be exposed in the most humiliating way possible." That's when Rick snapped. "You son of a bitch!" He lunged at me, but I was ready. 12 years of marriage to Sarah had taught me to expect attacks, and I sidestepped easily, letting his momentum carry him into a table full of champagne glasses. The crash was spectacular. Glass shattered, champagne splashed, and Rick went down hard, his rented tux soaked and his dignity in tatters. The room erupted in gasps and nervous laughter. I straightened my tie and looked down at him. "Careful, Rick," I said calmly. "You wouldn't want to have another accident that requires medical attention." Then I turned to Sarah, who was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "Ready to go home, honey?" I asked. "I think we've made enough of an impression for one night." She followed me out of the ballroom in stunned silence, and I knew that everyone in that room would be talking about this night for years to come. Sarah Morrison's affair was no longer a whispered rumor. It was confirmed fact, and her husband had just publicly humiliated both her and her lover in front of the entire town elite. But I still wasn't satisfied. This was just the beginning. The fallout from the chamber dinner was swift and brutal. By Monday morning, Sarah's boss at the bank had called her into his office, for what he delicately termed a discussion about public perception and professional conduct. By Tuesday, she was on indefinite administrative leave, while the bank's board decided whether her personal scandals reflected poorly on their institution. Rick fared even worse. Three of his biggest clients canceled contracts, citing concerns about reliability and character. His father, Old Man Donovan, was reportedly furious and threatening to cut Rick out of the family business entirely. Angela, meanwhile, had gone into full damage control mode, spinning a new narrative that painted me as an abusive husband who had somehow orchestrated the entire situation to destroy his innocent wife. She was making the rounds of coffee shops and beauty salons, telling anyone who would listen that I was dangerous and unstable. I let her talk. In fact, I encouraged it. "You're right to be concerned about Jake," I overheard her telling a group of women at Miller's Diner. "Sarah's been afraid of him for years. The way he planned that humiliation in Cleveland, the way he set her up, it's sociopathic." What Angela didn't know was that I'd been documenting everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to turn people against me. I had recordings, photographs, and a growing file of evidence that would prove very useful when the time came. Because Angela wasn't just Sarah's sister and enabler. She was the mastermind behind the entire affair. I'd started to piece it together after the chamber dinner when I began digging deeper into the timeline of Sarah's betrayal. Angela had been pushing Sarah toward Rick for months, arranging coincidental meetings, suggesting that Sarah deserved better than her boring electrician husband, and providing alibis for their secret encounters. But it went deeper than sisterly meddling. Angela had her own reasons for wanting to destroy my marriage, reasons that went back years before Sarah ever met Rick. 5 years ago, Angela had applied for a job at Morrison Electric. She'd been desperate, recently divorced, and badly in need of steady income. I'd interviewed her for a secretary position, but she'd made it clear she was interested in more than just filing and answering phones. When I'd turned down her advances and hired someone else, she'd accused me of discrimination and threatened to sue. Nothing had come of it. Her case was baseless, and she knew it. But Angela Morrison was the type of woman who never forgot a slight. She'd been planning her revenge ever since. And seducing my wife into an affair with Rick was just the opening move in a much larger game. The problem was, Angela had underestimated me. She thought I was just a simple small-town electrician who would crumble under pressure and public humiliation. She had no idea that I'd spent the last 12 years learning to be patient, learning to plan, and learning to strike back when it mattered most. My next move came during Millfield's annual Founders Day Festival, a weekend-long celebration that drew crowds from across the county. Sarah had been hiding in our house since the chamber dinner, but Angela convinced her that she needed to show her face in public to prove that she wasn't ashamed or defeated. "You can't let him win," Angela had told her during one of their long phone conversations that I'd been monitoring. "Jake wants you to hide, wants you to look guilty. You need to hold your head high and show this town that you're the victim here." So Sarah came to the festival, wearing her best dress and her bravest smile, with Angela by her side for moral support. They set up at the Morrison Electric booth, my booth, and started acting like nothing had happened, like Sarah still had every right to represent my business to the community. That's when I sprung my trap. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence and building my case. When Sarah and Angela arrived at my booth, I was waiting with a folder full of documents and a portable speaker system I'd borrowed from the festival organizers. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice carrying clearly across the festival grounds through the speaker system. "I'd like to take a moment to talk about family, loyalty, and the importance of truth in our community." Sarah's eyes went wide as she realized what was happening. Angela tried to grab the microphone, but I'd positioned myself strategically, with several loyal customers blocking her path. 5 years ago, I continued, my sister-in-law Angela Morrison applied for a job at my company. When I hired someone more qualified, she accused me of discrimination and threatened to destroy my business and my marriage. The crowd was gathering now, drawn by the drama and the promise of scandal. I could see Rick pushing through the crowd, his face red with anger, but he was too far away to stop me. What I didn't realize at the time was that Angela meant every word of that threat. For 5 years, she's been poisoning my wife against me, arranging meetings between Sarah and her lover, and orchestrating an affair designed to humiliate me and destroy my family. I pulled out a stack of photographs from my folder. Pictures of Angela and Rick meeting secretly, of Angela giving Sarah money for hotel rooms, of the three conspirators laughing together while planning their deception. But the most interesting part, I said, holding up a final photograph, is that Angela has been sleeping with Rick too. While she was encouraging my wife to have an affair with him, she was also carrying on her own relationship with the same man. The photograph showed Angela and Rick in an intimate embrace outside a motel on the outskirts of town. I'd taken it 3 weeks earlier after following Angela on one of her shopping trips. Sarah stared at the image in shock, her face cycling through disbelief, hurt, and finally rage as the truth sank in. Angela had been playing her, using her, manipulating her into an affair while carrying on her own secret relationship with the same man. "You lying bastard!" Rick shouted, finally reaching the booth. "That's fake! You doctored those photos!" I smiled and pulled out my phone, queuing up a video file. "Funny you should mention lies, Rick," I said, hitting play. The video showed Rick and Angela in the same motel parking lot, but this time the audio was clear. Angela was telling Rick how easy it had been to manipulate Sarah, how stupid her sister was, and how much she was looking forward to destroying my business once the divorce was finalized. The crowd was dead silent now, hanging on every word. Sarah was crying, but these weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of rage. "Angela," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "How could you do this to me?" Angela tried to run, but the crowd had closed in around us, and there was nowhere to go. She was trapped, exposed, and finally facing the consequences of her years of manipulation. "Sarah, I can explain," she started, but my wife cut her off. "Explain what? How you used me? How you destroyed my marriage for your own revenge? How you've been sleeping with the same man you encouraged me to have an affair with?" The confrontation was everything I'd hoped for and more. Angela's carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling in front of the entire town, and Sarah was finally seeing her sister for what she really was: a vindictive, manipulative woman who had destroyed her own family for the sake of petty revenge. But I wasn't done yet. This public humiliation was just the setup for my real revenge. As the crowd began to disperse, and Angela slunk away in disgrace, I leaned close to Sarah and whispered in her ear, "This is just the beginning, honey. You wanted to see what kind of man you married? You're about to find out." The week after Founder's Day was the longest of Sarah's life. She'd moved back into our house, not out of reconciliation, but because she had nowhere else to go. Angela had cut off all contact, Rick was avoiding her calls, and her friends had started treating her like a pariah. The woman who had once been the center of Millfield's social scene was now completely isolated. I should have felt sorry for her. The old Jake would have felt sorry for her. But the old Jake was gone, replaced by someone harder, someone who understood that mercy was a luxury I couldn't afford. "We need to talk," Sarah said on Thursday evening, finding me in my workshop behind the house. She looked terrible, hollow-eyed, thin, like she hadn't been sleeping or eating properly. "About what?" I asked, not looking up from the electrical panel I was rewiring. "About us. About what happens next." I set down my tools and finally met her eyes. "What happens next is that you reap what you've sown. You made your choices, Sarah. You chose to believe Angela over me, chose to have an affair, chose to humiliate me in front of our entire community. Now you get to live with the consequences." "I was manipulated," she said, her voice breaking. "Angela played me, used my insecurities against me. She made me believe that you didn't love me, that I deserved better." "And you believed her because it's what you wanted to believe?" I replied. "Angela didn't force you into Rick's bed, Sarah. She just gave you permission to do what you already wanted to do." Sarah flinched like I'd slapped her, but I wasn't done. "You want to know what's going to happen next? I'm going to make sure that everyone in this town knows exactly who you are. Not the victim you're pretending to be, but the selfish, unfaithful woman who destroyed her own family because she was bored with her ordinary life. Jake, please, please what? Please forgive you? Please pretend that 12 years of marriage means nothing? Please let you walk away from this without facing any real consequences?" I stood up and walked closer to her. close enough to see the fear in her eyes. You wanted excitement, Sarah. You wanted drama and passion and a man who would make you feel alive. Well, congratulations. You got exactly what you asked for. That's when she told me about the pregnancy test. I'm late, she whispered, the words barely audible. 2 weeks late, and I don't know. I don't know if it's yours or his. For a moment, the workshop was completely silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Then I started laughing, a cold, bitter sound that made Sarah step backward. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. The cherry on top of this whole disaster. Jake, if I'm pregnant, we need to figure out. We don't need to figure out anything, I interrupted. You need to figure it out. You need to decide if you're going to have a baby that might not be your husband's, and you need to live with whatever choice you make. Sarah was crying now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret, no desire to comfort her. She had burned every bridge between us, and now she was standing in the ashes, asking me to help her rebuild. I won't help you, I said quietly. I won't be your safety net or your backup plan or your convenient husband who pretends everything is fine. You made your bed, Sarah. Now lie in it. She left the workshop without another word, and I went back to my rewiring project. But my hands were shaking, and I had to put down the tools before I electrocuted myself. 2 days later, Rick showed up at my house. I was expecting him. In fact, I'd been surprised it had taken him this long to work up the courage for a confrontation. He was drunk. I could smell the whiskey on him from 10 feet away, and his expensive clothes were wrinkled and stained. You destroyed my life, he slurred, swaying on my front porch. My father won't speak to me. My business is ruined, and the whole town thinks I'm a joke. You destroyed your own life, I replied calmly. I just made sure everyone could see what you'd done. She might be pregnant, Rick said suddenly, and I realized that Sarah had told him about her suspicions. If that baby is mine, then you'll have to live with that, I interrupted. Just like I've had to live with knowing that my wife was screwing my best friend behind my back. Rick tried to hit me then, a clumsy, drunken swing that I easily avoided. He stumbled and fell against my porch railing, barely catching himself before he went over. You want to fight me, Rick? I asked. You want to settle this like men? Fine, but not here, and not while you're drunk. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, behind Murphy's bar. Just you and me. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes, trying to process what I'd said. You're challenging me to a fight? I'm giving you one last chance to act like a man instead of a coward, I said. You can show up and face me, or you can run away, like you did in Cleveland. Your choice. Rick staggered to his feet, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. I'll be there, he said, and when I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd never been born. I watched him stumble down my driveway and climb into his truck, then called the police to report a drunk driver heading toward downtown. Rick was pulled over before he made it 2 blocks, adding a DUI to his growing list of problems. But that was just a bonus. The real payoff would come tomorrow night, when I finished what I'd started. Word of the fight spread through Millfield like wildfire. By Saturday afternoon, half the town was talking about the showdown between Jake Morrison and Rick Donovan behind Murphy's bar. Some people thought I was crazy for challenging a man who outweighed me by 50 pounds. Others figured it was about time someone taught Rick a lesson he wouldn't forget. I spent the day preparing, not by lifting weights or practicing punches, but by setting up the final phase of my revenge. Everything had been leading to this moment. The public humiliations, the exposed lies, the destroyed relationships. Tonight, I would finish what Angela had started 5 years ago. Sarah tried to stop me from leaving the house. Don't do this, she begged, grabbing my arm as I headed for the door. He's bigger than you, stronger than you. He could really hurt you. He already hurt me, I replied, gently removing her hand. He hurt me the first time he touched you, and you hurt me every time you let him. This isn't about physical pain, Sarah. This is about justice. What if I am pregnant? What if the baby is yours? Don't you want to be here for that? I looked at my wife, really looked at her, for what I knew would be the last time. If you're pregnant and if the baby is mine, then I hope it grows up to be nothing like either of us, I said, because we're both terrible people who destroyed something that should have been beautiful. Murphy's bar sat on the edge of Millfield's old industrial district, surrounded by abandoned factories and empty lots. The parking lot behind the bar was perfect for what I had planned. Isolated enough for privacy, but visible from the road for witnesses. Rick was already there when I arrived, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. He'd sobered up since yesterday, but he still looked rough. Unshaven, hollow-eyed, desperate. Angela was with him, which surprised me, and so were about 30 other people who'd come to watch the show. "I didn't think you'd actually show up," Rick called out as I walked toward him. "Thought you might chicken out at the last minute." "I always keep my promises," I replied, pulling off my jacket and rolling up my sleeves. Unlike some people. The crowd formed a loose circle around us, and I could see money changing hands as people placed bets on the outcome. Most of the money was on Rick. He was bigger, younger, had a reputation as a brawler from his high school days. They were betting on the wrong man. "Before we start," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I want to make sure everyone understands what this is really about." I pulled out my phone and connected it to a portable speaker I'd brought. "This isn't just about adultery," I continued. "It's about a conspiracy to destroy my marriage and my business, orchestrated by a woman who's been planning revenge for 5 years. I hit play on the first recording, Angela's voice clear and unmistakable, talking to Rick about how easy it had been to manipulate Sarah. "That's fake!" Angela shouted, but her voice was shaking. I played the second recording, Angela and Sarah, discussing how to hide the affair from me. Then a third, Rick and Angela, laughing about how stupid I was, how blind, how easy to fool. The crowd was murmuring now, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. They'd known about the affair, but they hadn't understood the full scope of the conspiracy. 5 years ago, I said, putting away the phone, Angela propositioned me. When I turned her down, she swore she'd destroy my marriage. Everything that's happened since then, Sarah's affair, Rick's involvement, even this fight, has been part of her plan. Rick looked confused, glancing back and forth between me and Angela. "Oh, and what's he talking about?" "Tell him, Angela," I said. "Tell him how you've been using him. Tell him how you convinced Sarah to have an affair with him so you could destroy my marriage. Tell him how you've been sleeping with him too, playing both sides of your own game." Angela's face went white, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't deny it. Not with all the evidence I'd gathered. "You used me," Rick said slowly, the realization dawning on his face. "You used both of us." "I gave you what you wanted," Angela snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Sarah needed excitement. You needed validation. And Jake needed to be taught a lesson. Everybody got what they deserved." "What I deserved," I said quietly, "was a faithful wife and honest friends. What I got was a front row seat to the worst kind of betrayal. But you know what? I'm grateful." I started walking toward Rick, my hands loose at my sides. "I'm grateful because you showed me who I really am. You showed me that I'm not the weak, boring man you all thought I was. You showed me that I'm capable of patience, planning, and perfect revenge." Rick raised his fists, ready to fight, but I wasn't interested in trading punches. Instead, I pulled out one final piece of evidence, a manila envelope thick with documents. "DNA test results," I announced, holding up the envelope. "Sarah's pregnant, and we all want to know who the father is, right?" Sarah was there. I hadn't seen her arrive, but she was standing at the edge of the crowd, her face pale with shock. "The test was conclusive," I continued. "No doubt at all about paternity." I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers, but instead of reading them, I walked over to Sarah and handed them to her. "You want to know the truth?" I asked. "Read it yourself, out loud. Let everyone hear." Sarah's hands were shaking as she took the papers. She looked down at them, her eyes scanning the text, and then her face crumpled. "I'm not pregnant," she whispered. The test was negative. The crowd was silent, confused by this anticlimactic revelation, but I wasn't done yet. "That's right," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "No baby, no paternity questions. No innocent life caught in the middle of this mess. Just 3 adults who destroyed everything they touched." I turned back to Rick, who was still standing there with his fists raised, looking lost and confused. "You want to fight me, Rick? Go ahead. Hit me. Beat me up. Prove that you're the better man." Rick hesitated, his fists wavering. "But before you do," I continued, "ask yourself this. What exactly are you fighting for? Angela used you. Sarah's not pregnant. Your business is ruined. Your reputation is destroyed. And your father won't speak to you. What's left to fight for?" Rick's hands dropped to his sides. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving him looking small and defeated. I loved her, he said quietly. I really thought Sarah loved me too. Sarah doesn't love anyone but herself, I replied. And Angela doesn't love anyone at all. They used you, Rick, just like they used me. I walked over to my wife, who was still staring at the fake DNA test results I'd had printed at Kinko's. Goodbye, Sarah, I said. I've filed for divorce. The papers are on the kitchen table. You can keep the house. I've already bought a new place across town. But you can't keep my name, my business, or my respect. Those are mine. I turned to address the crowd one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Jake Morrison Revenge Tour. Thank you for your attention, and remember, if you're going to betray someone, make sure they're not smarter than you think they are. Then I walked away, leaving Sarah crying in a parking lot, Rick staring at his ruined life, and Angela finally understanding that her 5-year plan had backfired spectacularly. 3 months later, I was living in a new house on the other side of town, running Morrison Electric better than ever, and dating a nice woman from the next county over who didn't know or care about my past drama. Sarah had moved in with a cousin in Columbus. Angela had left town entirely, and Rick was working as a day laborer, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. Sarah didn't contest anything. She couldn't, not after everything that had come to light. I kept the business, she kept the debt, and we both kept the scars. But I was free. Free from the lies, free from the betrayal, free from the prison of a marriage that had been built on quicksand from day one. They'd wanted a villain, and I'd given them one. But I'd also given them something else: the truth and in.